Okay, so Stephanie, what I did is I put it into Word, um, and I've done a couple things to it to kind of help. The first thing I did is I labeled my points. So you can see here, I took the first point and just did A, B, C, D, E, F. And you can see here A to B represents the trip to Tate's house. B to C represents the time spent at Tate's house. C to D represents the trip to the library. D to E represents the time at the library. And E to F represents the trip from the library to home. Okay, so the first question, how much time passed between school ending and Isaac's arrival home? I see where you've jotted down 4 hours, but if you look really closely at the measurement here on point F that they give you 3.75, which is 3 hours and 45 minutes, or 3.75 hours. So it's not quite 4 hours. And on the next page, you can see where I've done that. The chart is done in half hours, but some points show 15-minute intervals or quarter-hour intervals. So just keep that in mind as we go through the rest of this. Question B, how long did Isaac stay at Tate's house? Okay, so the length of time at Tate's house is from B to C. So you can see the time measurements down here are done in half hours. So he left at the 2.5 hour point, but he didn't get there until the half-hour point. So that gives you 2 hours spent at Tate's house. Okay, so you can kind of see that here. He stopped there at 0.5, 2. You count the half hours, he leaves at 2.5 and 2. You subtract the difference, and that's the answer for B. For part C, how far is the library from Isaac's house? Okay. If we're looking at the library, he left the library and went straight home, right? So the distance between here, where he left the library, and his home is from 1.5 to 0. So it's 1.5 miles. Okay. So find the distance. Same thing. You're just going to look at the difference in, instead of looking at the x coordinate, you're going to look at the y coordinate. D, you go back up to D. D says, where was Isaac 3 hours after school ended? So if we look at the chart here, you can see at the 3 hour mark, he was between points D and E. And we know between points D and E, he was at the library. So you can see that down here. So, if you label the graph correctly, you find the time coordinate of 3 and find where his line of travel intersects the 3 hour mark, and it shows that he's at the library. E, this is the one I need a little bit of help with because I haven't done function notation in a while. But if you look at it, it says use a function notation to write a mathematical expression that says the same thing as question D. Okay, so f of x is another way of asking what the y coordinate is. So to do that, all we did, f parentheses x is read as f of x. But because we're looking compared to distance and time, I just use d of x. It doesn't really matter however you want to write it. But d of x or f of x is equal to 1.5 because it is a constant function. It's a horizontal line. He is at that point through the time that he is there. And lastly, F asked, when was Isaac walking the fastest? And how fast was he walking? So this one's kind of got a little bit of thought going into it. So you can see his walking is when we have these angled lines. They're not horizontal. So here we have he travels 1 mile in 30 minutes, which is a half a mile an hour, right? Okay, so we've got a half a mile an hour here between school and Tate's house. When he left Tate's house and got to the library, he traveled a half a mile in 15 minutes, roughly. Okay, so that is a quarter of a mile per hour. And then lastly, you see between the library and home, he traveled 1.5 miles in half an hour, which is 0.75 or 3/4 of a mile per hour. Therefore, he traveled the fastest between the library and his home, walking 1.5 miles in 30 minutes, which works out to be 0.7 miles per hour. I hope this helps. And something I find whenever I have a word problem like this is to go ahead and label it and make it a little bit more clear. You can see the point here that I ended up labeling as D. They didn't even have labeled or give it coordinates. So I went ahead and did that just to make it a little bit clearer. And clarification really helps when they're trying to narrow down these multi-step word problems, especially when there's a picture. Pictures are a lot easier to work with than trying to do it in your head. So just take the 2 or 3 minutes that it might take to label it, figure out where you're at, and then say, okay, well, A to B represents this, B to C represents that, and it'll go a little bit faster in the future, hopefully. All right. If you have any more questions, just shoot me another message. I'll be happy to answer it.